Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the 8GB Radeon RX 9060 XT. I paid £240 for this one on Amazon, which I think is a pretty decent price. This is probably one of the best options for this sort of money, with Nvidia's 5060 filling a similar price and performance bracket, at least here in the UK. The value proposition is going to differ massively depending on where you live. Here, this 8GB Sapphire Pulse card is about £90 cheaper than the lowest cost 16GB models. A big saving, but also a big sacrifice because, as I just mentioned, AMD's 9060 XT comes in both 8 and 16GB flavours. I've got a few videos in mind with this thing, but first things first, I want to talk about my initial impressions with this card and run a few side-by-side gaming comparisons starting at 1080p. Sure, any VRAM related performance differences may be less noticeable at this resolution, but I thought why not start with what is still the most popular resolution according to the Steam survey. We'll be covering 1440p as well as comparisons to other cards at some point. I want to continue where I left off yesterday in my YouTube short. I was running Oblivion Remastered and all was going well until the game slowed right down to a juddery mess. I immediately put this down to a VRAM limitation with the 8GB card, but I tend to experience a few little hiccups here and there with most graphics cards that I test this game with. If we look at a side-by-side comparison, it's fair to say that even the 16GB card has a few issues, but nothing compared to the 8GB model. This card will run the game fine for a while at high settings, but all of a sudden the performance will just fall apart. The game will go from around 60 FPS to almost half of that in an instance. The 16GB 9060 XT didn't do this. I even went back to the game for about half an hour after benchmarking, and aside from the occasional stutter, it remained very playable. In some cases, poor optimization can be just as much to blame for poor performance as limited VRAM. It seems like there have been plenty of games that have come out over the last couple of years that don't run all that well. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is not one of them. In fact, this game is generally considered well optimized. That's why I wanted to test it next. We know this one runs well on a wide range of hardware, so let's see if that helps us here in a situation where we might start to encroach on that VRAM limit. I'm playing with the Ultra preset. If your GPU doesn't have enough memory, then the game will start using system RAM, which is much slower. This is after the data has passed through the PCI Express bus. I'm using an i7-12700F in a PCIe 5.0 configuration, as well as 32 gigs of 6000 MHz DDR5. Therefore, this is a better case VRAM limited scenario. Using an older PCIe 3.0 system, for example, may make matters worse. Anyway, performance was similar between both cards on average here, but the 8GB GPU had an intermittent stuttering issue that occurred every few seconds, destroying the 0.1% low. Lowering the settings to high would fix this, but it's a sacrifice we don't need to make with the 16GB model. At least the 8GB card is quite a bit cheaper, but it should probably be named something else, or maybe even cheaper still. Next up, we'll hit these two with a little bit of ray tracing. Not the best idea, at least not at native resolution, but both cards can handle the RT Ultra preset in The Witcher 3 Next Gen. The 8GB card to a lesser extent. This will average 37 FPS compared to the 16GB card's 50. Not only that, but the 16GB card will maintain consistency with percentile lows of 42 and 38. This is compared to 19 and 9 respectively. But let's look at the slightly more positive news. There are plenty of games that will run fine on this 8GB version at 1080p, matching or coming very close to the 16GB model. That's not a justification, merely an observation. I think this should have been called a 9060 non-XT and priced at under 200, but no point dwelling on it. Black Myth Wukong will be a challenge for both cards at the very high settings, averaging less than 45 FPS with similar percentile lows. Of course, we're still gaming at 1080p here, so things may change when we get around to testing 1440p. Counter-Strike 2 will also run wonderfully on both cards, so if you play a lot of CS2 or other lightweight esports titles, then the 8GB card will be fine, especially as you'd likely be playing with lower settings. Just don't decide to get into Oblivion all of a sudden, because then, well, you've seen what happens. Maxing out GTA 5 Enhanced Edition is doable with the maximum RT preset with both cards, and performance is similar across the board. The new ray traced reflections option looks fantastic. The performance metrics were slightly improved with the 16GB 9060 XT, but nothing that is too noticeable without a frame rate overlay. If I didn't record the numbers, then this game wouldn't feel any different to play on the 8GB GPU, put it that way. The same can be said for Helldivers 2, which runs well at Ultra on both cards. We're looking at similar mid-90 FPS numbers with very consistent frame times. There's really not much to say here, and this seems to run nicely on a wide range of hardware. It also looks pretty decent here at the 1080p Ultra preset. Cyberpunk 2077 also did better than I anticipated on the 8GB 9060 XT, again nearly matching the 16GB version. There were no horrible performance issues, at least not at 1080p with ray tracing turned off. I'm using the Ultra preset here with the default anti-aliasing solution, so no native FSR here. I haven't used any upscaling throughout today's video. If I have used FSR, it's been at native resolution. We'll finalise then with Red Dead Redemption 2. Now this is more than playable with the 8GB RX 9060 XT, but in comparison to the 16GB card, we're getting about 10 FPS less on average. The same can be said for that 0.1% number. Despite being one of the oldest games tested today, this will still exceed 8GB of VRAM when the settings are turned right up. Something I think isn't too unreasonable to want to do with a graphics card that you're paying this much for, especially when it's clear that this card is capable of doing so, providing it has the memory to do it with. It can do so with 90 FPS in fact, if it has enough memory to really stretch its legs, and this is a good example of how the VRAM is limiting this slightly cheaper option, to add to the others that we looked at earlier. There were no ill effects here in Red Dead though, no pop-in slowdown or missing assets, not that I noticed anyway, and I was playing for about 15-20 minutes before beginning the benchmark. Now as I said earlier, the 8GB card is fine in a lot of cases, but it shouldn't have the same name as the 16GB card. It is quite a bit cheaper, which is good, but £90 minimum for extra peace of mind is certainly going to be worth it to a lot of people. If you are on a more limited budget though, then this 8GB 9060 XT is actually among the best new cards at its price point. Yeah, I mean you've got the 5060 from Nvidia, there's a 5050 which I think isn't even worth talking about at the moment because it seems to be like a similar price. I think it's about $250. Not far off the 5060, and in some cases more expensive than the 9060 XT, and from the few reviews I've seen, the 5050 is not good at all, but we'll be looking at that at some point. I think on the used market for similar to 9060 XT 8GB performance, you've probably got cards like the 3070, though after a quick look on eBay UK, they seem to be going for the same price. Again, it totally depends on where you live and what deals are about, especially when it comes to the used market, which can vary even more. But as I said, yeah, as far as new cards are concerned, the 9060 XT 8GB is among the best, so do with that information what you will. I'd seriously recommend the 16GB card if you want to get a 9060 XT. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, let me know your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.